Good morning and welcome to this Cabinet meeting on 31st of March 2025. The first item on the agenda is to receive apologies for absence. So we have apologies from Councillor Andrew Brown, Councillor Liz Withington and Councillor Callum Ringer. Any other apologies we need to note? No. Okay. The minutes of the meeting held the 3rd of March. Before we try to approve those, were there any questions on those minutes? Go ahead. Okay. If we can note that as an amendment, then that's absolutely fine. Were there any other questions or points to raise? Okay, if not, I will propose those minutes of the 3rd of March are accepted, seconded by Councillor Fredericks, and presumably all of those in favour, everyone? Yeah, thank you. Item 3, public questions and statements. Do we have any public questions or statements recorded? No. Okay. Item 4 is declarations of interest in items on the agenda. Were there any interests or requests for dispensations? No. Item 5, we have no items of urgent business, and item 6 is member questions. Were there any members' questions at this stage? No. Okay. Item 7 is recommendations from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We don't seem to have any written recommendations, is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were non-relevant to Cabinet from the 12th of March meeting, but that meeting did review one recommendation from the 12th of February meeting, and it confirmed the following. So this is a recommendation that was, as I said, reviewed on the in March, but it relates to the 12th of February meeting. So it reads to ask the relevant portfolio holders and directors to review options to improve mobile signal hotspots, not spots, and the reasons why mast applications fail, and communicate its actions to residents and businesses. Now that's a rewording of the recommendation that I made to you at that meeting. In substance, it remains the same. In wording, it complies precisely, I'm told, with the recording of that meeting.
Okay, thank you. Can I just make one request that we have written recommendations just for the few? I appreciate it was for the month previously, but it's just useful for us to reference. But thank you for just casting your mind back. Hopefully you remember that discussion. Thank you for taking some time to look at that and for coming back to us today. So I mean, I'm presuming we're happy to accept that recommendation given verbally. Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, that will obviously, a lot of that will come my way. It's work that I've already started and will continue with, and happy to work with ONS on that. So
yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's useful.
I'm grateful for that, Mr. Chairman. Just to amplify, as Councillor Toy recognises, much of that is aimed at his portfolio, but there was also a matter with regard to the planning applications that Councillor Brown also recognised at the 12th of March meeting. So it applies to both your Cabinet responsibilities.
That's fine. I acknowledge that. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. If there are any issues like that, where there's dual responsibility or involvement, we'll either deal with that as if there was an item coming forward, but we'll have any relevant discussions we need to through the normal cycle and business planning, etc. So that's absolutely fine. Okay. Any other questions on that before we move on to the following item? No. Okay. Item 8 is the Local Authority Housing Fund Round 3 and funding for temporary accommodation. Councillor Fredericks.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, officers, members, general public. Hello. So this is basically the next round of the Local Authority Housing Fund. We've been successful in being awarded £588,000 to help purchase another 6 units of temporary accommodation for homeless households. So, you know the backstory, you know that what desperate times this is, and also these homes improve the residents' lives tremendously while they're waiting for a permanent home. So the funding was initially for 4 houses, but our incredible talented housing strategy manager has stretched it to 6. And this is because this helps us avoid paying the stamp duty on those and therefore saving us a whole lot of money in fees. So thank you to Officer Debbage. Any questions? I'll be delighted to answer.
Okay. Were there any questions on this item? Okay, Councillor Holiday, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's absolutely brilliant that we can offer homeless households hope and support in this way. It's, fantastic news. You speak about management and repair costs as part of the ongoing costs for running these houses, and I wondered if there was a business case underpinning this particular proposal.
Thank you. So I'll pass over to Officer Debbage on that one because I think she's got the stats on it.
I don't have the business case stats with me, but yes, we do undertake a business case to look at the savings between using externally paid for, nightly paid bed and breakfast type TA versus our own housing stock. So yes, whilst some of the income we receive is offset by management and maintenance costs, that's a considerable saving when compared to the £700 a week we would spend on nightly paid, as well as Councillor Fredericks has said, the very different quality of experience that customers get from living in a proper home as opposed to non-self-contained bed and breakfast. We've also had an external value for money review carried out by the East of England Local Government Association, who very much backed our approach to purchasing our own TA instead of using nightly paid.
And if I can add to that as well, the housing benefit that our residents actually claim goes towards the maintenance of those houses too. So it's an absolute win-win for everyone. And we should be having 31 as a result of this funding and other funding by the end of the year. So I'm incredibly pleased, and I'd like to extend my thanks to all officers concerned.
Okay, thank you. Christopher, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd add, I think it's excellent news, but one mild concern I have is I note that you're planning to add another £900,000 from potential second homes council tax. I know from all the discussions we've had previously on that is that's an estimate, and that's could be a relatively rough estimate as well. So what level of risk has been, what's the level of risk around whether that would be 900,000 or until we actually start charging that, we don't really know how much we're going to get in terms of people could look to mitigate that by trying to avoid it by various means and manners.
Thank you for your question. So the 900,000 is actually quite a conservative small c amount that we've put aside. We anticipate that we should get 1.3 in second homes council tax. The rest of that council tax will go to schemes that are building affordable homes in the district that need that extra top up. So yes, and also obviously we voted on the capital programme that allows us money to be spent on capital which we won't need. So there really isn't any risk on that as far as I can see.
Yeah, so obviously in recent history we've made the very most of this additional funding, so I'm confident we can do that again and put it to good use in terms of certainly reducing the cost of nightly paid accommodation associated with temporary accommodation as well, and also providing really the most appropriate base for those families from which to recover from the impact of homelessness. So it's ultimately a very good thing. Councillor Shires, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more, I just wanted to check the percentage before I'd responded. So when we calculated the second homes council tax that we would have expected, we did allow for about 35% that we anticipate would be avoided. So we have been very, very clear on the risk that we've managed through this, and we're not anticipating the full 35% would be avoided, but we have put that figure in to make sure that we're not overestimating and that we're managing risk accordingly.
Yeah, so certainly tended to refer to that as the sort of attrition rate, which I can't speak to what other authorities have done in that respect, but in terms of Norfolk, obviously we have the highest proportion of second homes. So quite I suppose a skeptical position in terms of just how high that attrition rate is, but I think it's appropriate. Okay, any other questions or points on that item? So were the recommendations proposed? Councillor Fredericks, I'll happily second them, and all of those in favour, please. Fantastic. So the following item, item 9, is coastal management and the budget for reactive works. Councillor Bathwaite, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is about consolidation of budgets and responses to an increasingly dynamic situation on our coast. This is about funding that is required that previously might have come out of other pots, but has fallen more and more on the coastal management team. And as you can see in the papers, it is considered sensible to consolidate those funds. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So as you are probably aware, there is expenditure coming from different areas of the council presently to deal with this increasing scenario we're facing, and it's coming from our leisure, from our property, from our coast, and this consolidates. The money is already clearly being spent, and an increasing rate is fair to say as we move through the years, in terms of the demand, in terms of the precipitation and the impact that's having on cliffs, etc. So felt necessary to an expedient really to change the way we are allocating the budget for this. So were there any questions? Councillor Fitch-Tillett, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's worthwhile pointing out that there is no central government funding for maintenance.
That's correct.
And I would urge the Cabinet member to work through the local government SIG to continue lobby for that.
Yeah, so one of the impacts we're certainly facing here is that reduction in government funding generally, and that is a related factor here. Sorry, if there's anything you wanted to say.
Yeah, just to say, I am working with the coastal SIG, and we are lobbying at the moment, and will continue to do so. And perhaps this is another argument for a coastal minister.
Councillor Shires, go ahead.
Yeah. So from my perspective, we know that some of these works fall across many teams. So we have the coastal team, some will fall into property services, some would fall into the leisure. So this is a way of putting it all into one place that we can adequately monitor and react accordingly when we're setting future budgets.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I've lost the recommendations on my page. Okay, so the recommendations, to establish the dedicated cliff works budget overseen by Coastal Management Department and separate from any other existing budgets. Is that proposed? Yeah. Seconded by Councillor Shires. Just before I take the vote, just to ensure no other questions. No. All of those in favour, please. Thank you. That's unanimous. Item 10 is coast protection works at Overstrand. Councillor Bathwaite again.
Yeah, this is a recommendation we start doing the work that is urgently required at seawall at Overstrand. We're seeking 1.28 million, so that's 1.280 million to be added to the capital programme for the 2025-26 for this scheme, and that is to be funded by capital receipts and grant funding. And I ask the Cabinet that they agree to these recommendations. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I'd just like to point out that there is two events at Overstrand, and they should not be confused. There is the cliff fall, and there is the sea wall, and this is regarding the sea wall rather than the cliff fall. Thank you very much. The previous item was more to do with the cliff fall. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Two separate events and challenges to overcome. Obviously, the cliff fall at Overstrand has been another prominent event, obviously among others in recent times. And yeah, certainly this investment is, I think, crucial to both Overstrand's future for its residents, but its economy as well. And can't really underestimate how important it is we do these works. And thank you as well to Councillor Partridge for joining us today to observe from Overstrand Parish Council. Were there any points, any questions anyone wanted to raise in respect of this item? Councillor Dixon, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you just clarify whether this was an item that was on the capital projects list when we considered the budget for 25-26 back in February?
So we alluded to this coming forward, if you recall. It would be, we're sort of scoping this out now, of course, but it was highlighted at the time that this matter would be coming forward. I think there was even some media coverage about it at the time potentially, but it was certainly within the papers because it's been something we've been aware of and working up to for a little while now. So in answer to your question, no, there wasn't a figure there, I don't believe, but we'd had some sort of idea around the potential cost. Harry, go ahead.
At that time, there was a heads up regarding this project. I would say since that time, the coastal erosion mapping, National Coastal Erosion Mapping has come through, which has slightly changed the circumstances at Overstrand. So where it had been a strong hold the line policy, it is now far more nuanced. And as such, it means that we cannot apply for the same level of capital from government departments as we would hope to have done otherwise. So it's falling far more on us, and so it has to be recognised that the larger scheme that we might have been hoping for at that time is no longer possible. Thank you.
Yeah. And certainly the NSERM, have I got that correct?
NSERM 2.
NSERM 2 was published after our budget. So yeah, some factors there in terms of timing, but clearly crucial work that we've got to be getting on top of now. So were there any other questions on this item? Anything officers wanted to add before? Go ahead.
Very briefly, within the last week, we've come to understand that there's a fund available to the RFCC, which is the Regional Flood and Coast Committee, a sum of some 400,000 is likely to be available, which this scheme seems to match quite well with those potential criteria. So it's not by no means certain, but it's something we intend to apply for, and we have to get an expression of interest by the 16th of April, I think, to sort of get on the list for that, which this scheme should certainly be able to do. So the decision on that, I think, will be available towards the end of April. So as well as the regular Environment Agency funding, which we would hope to target for part of the funding towards this scheme, we'll go for that RFCC funding.
Okay. So I'm just trying to get my head around the recommendations page again, which I've managed to lose on my phone. I'm not very well there. 38, thank you. No, you're right. Yeah, sure. Okay. So the recommendations, they're set out in the appendix. I think it's 1. And just before we take the recommendation, go ahead, Councillor Glasswaite.
Yeah, I would just like to propose it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm happy to second that. And can we take a vote of all of those in favour, please?
Can I just check this? The second recommendation is that Cabinet agree an option from options 1 to 4 to reallocate the existing scheme. Yeah, so you need to identify which option you're choosing, I believe.
Yeah.
So it's on page, in fact, the next page 39. I think that's the one of the capital.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay. Quite hard to put your finger down on which one we're talking about here, because they're not set out with numbers, are they?
So it looks like, so it's page 25. I've got the options numbered.
Yeah.
An option 4 would be my preference, which is a more limited targeted works at the specific locations of the greatest immediate known structural concern on the Overstrand seawall.
Yeah. And that was obviously the recommendation from the start. That's, I think, what we presumed we were talking about from the beginning, really. So that's that results in a cumulative reduction of 649,000. It's borrowing reallocated of 57,000. So just to ensure that's the one we're all talking about, and that's what we presume from the beginning. The 4th option.
Page 38.
So if you're happy to propose that option,
I'm happy to propose that.
and I'll be
option.
happy to second. And can we take a vote of all those in favour, please? Thank you.
Can I just check that's the funding option as well? You're choosing option 4, because I think you needed to choose for the sorts of works and the sorts of funding.
Yeah, okay. I believe, sorry, can we just, which it would be helpful possibly.
Okay, the Cabinet recommend to the full council that it approves the required works to the Overstrand sea wall. Option 4 of this report at the paragraph 3.9, and that 1.280 million be added to the capital programme for the 25-26 for this scheme, and that this be funded by 0.245 million of capital receipts, 0.386 million of grant funding if able to obtain grant funding, and the balance from borrowing. The Cabinet agree on an option from the options 1 to 4 as outlined in table at the paragraph of 1.5 of Appendix A to reallocate the existing scheme budget to reduce the level of overall budget borrowing if it is minded so to do. That Cabinet recommend to full council that the scheme be funded by up to a maximum of 1.035 million of borrowing, depending on which option it would like to agree. It would be noted that the council may be able to access grant funding of 0.386 million for the scheme, and if successful, it is proposed that the level of borrowing be reduced to 0.649 million. The Cabinet approved that delegated authority be given to the Assistant Director for Sustainable Growth in consultation with the portfolio holder for Coast to procure, design and deliver the scheme together with the development of any applications for external funding or necessary consents.
Yeah, so what we also need to deal with, and apologies, this is just consequence of not having the paper agenda in front of me, which I should have done, I apologise for that, is determine the option, what between options 1 to 4. I think it's page 31 in terms of the scope and scale of the work. So and obviously what we were, our presumption, but we need to agree it, is that we're looking at the targeted works at specific locations of greatest immediate need, and that's opposed to do nothing, more extensive works, or is it set out in option 1, regular repair and maintenance, which wouldn't be sufficient, really, according to our own estimations. So what we're recommending is therefore option 4. So I think we need to take a vote just to determine that, if that's okay. Is that okay? Go ahead.
Apologies, everybody. I got stuck at the at Sutton Bridge. So apologies for being late. They opened the bridge, so I had to sit and wait for it to open and close. Yeah, I think the confusion here is perhaps in the way the report's been written, which is my fault. On page 39 and 40, there's paragraphs 1.4 and 1.5. So I think everybody is agreed on, or the proposal is for option 4 in terms of the works that we do, and it's then how we fund it. So we could, at page 39, paragraph 1.4, we could use some of the existing capital programme works for to fund this, if members were minded to do so. So that would create a saving in the capital programme, but it would be at the cost of having funding for other schemes that have been identified, which are that there is the annual programme for coastal protection related works. There is the coastal management budget as well, which could be used and reallocated. And these would reduce the overall need for the council to borrow going forwards, but it would be at the cost of having any budget at the present time available for other coastal works. So in paragraph 1.5 on page 40, it would be, as I think you're proposing at the moment, borrowing, assuming we got the grant of 386,649, if you used the budgets from the other existing schemes, you could reduce borrowing down to 342. You could reduce the borrowing right down to 0 virtually, but it would be at the cost of the other schemes, which perhaps isn't the preferred option. But it's just in there for consideration.
Okay, so I mean, we had considered option 4 as possibly the better one. You're saying your advice is that it would not be. Is that correct? Can I bring Councillor Yeah. And that was our consideration. Councillor Shines, go ahead.
Sorry, so there's slightly more confusion. So if you look at the table on 1.5, just for clarity, it's about the future funding of it. So option 1 is what we have just decided to do if we take option 4, and I think that's where the confusions come. So option 1 is that we borrow the remaining 649,000, but as Cabinet will be aware of, there are other lines in the capital programme that relate to coastal work. And if we were to reallocate those lines, then it would bring the borrowing down. It would mean that the projects that money was allocated for wouldn't go ahead. So as we sit here now, that wouldn't be my preferred option. My preferred option would be to go for option 1 in terms of the borrowing for the full extent of the balance. But that's not to say that I don't think there's a little bit of work for us to do with the capital programme for coastal works, because if we look at the titles for many of them, it would be better if there was some clarity of them overall. So my option would be, I would prefer option 4 in terms of the scope of the works and option 1 in terms of the finances. I hope that adds some clarity to the conversation, but just for my cabinet colleague for Coast, we may need to look at the way that the budget's titled for Coast so that there's a deeper understanding of what we would potentially miss out on were we to reallocate money. But
Okay, well,
Does that make sense?
let's just recap here, because it's been a bit confusing in terms of different options, and apologies for that. Sorry, did someone else want? I'll bring you in shortly, Councillor Dixon, but I think we want to just try and make some progress with it, if that's okay. So we're dealing here with two outcomes here, both set out 1 to 4 options under 1.5 and earlier in the agenda in respect to the scope of works, and that is on which page? Sorry, that is set out initially on page 27. So our preference is obviously for more limited targeted work as per the recommendation, and option 1 in respect of the funding as set out on page 40, sorry. And that is obviously resulting in the borrowing of 649,000, and to avoid any cumulative impacts on other works. So apologies for a bit of cross wires there in terms of the different options. And before we take these recommendations, I'll bring Councillor Dixon in just to ask his question. Thank you.
Yes, I'd just like clarity over the second paragraph of the recommendation, where it refers to reallocate existing scheme budgets to reduce the level of overall borrowing, if it is so minded. So I need just to understand whether you are minded to take that option or not. So what will be the impact on overall borrowing?
Councillor Shines.
So that's the point that I was raising before. So on 1.5, on page 40 of the agenda pack, option 1 talks about the overall borrowing. But we do have coastal management budget set for the next 3 years as we set through the budget setting process, well, including this financial year and the 2 future years. So it's the conversation we're having is we're going to borrow. So are we putting that borrowing into this one scheme, or are we borrowing for both sets of capital works? That's what we're discussing right now. So we have the borrowing already set in there for the coastal management. That's already set. We've agreed that at full council. This is an additional item. Are we then I think the question that we're being asked from officers is, are we moving that borrowing from the coastal management fund? Are we diverting that all into the Overstrand project, or are we going to run the two projects concurrently? I'm not minded to stop maintaining the coast, because as we've seen, we do have a dynamic coastline and things can happen, and the borrowing for the coastal management fund would be undertaken as and when we needed to do the works rather than for a prescribed scheme. So that's my stance on where we are.
Yeah, I think maybe I also understood part of your question, Councillor Dixon, was it alluding to the cost of borrowing?
My real concern is to understand whether or not you are minded to reallocate existing scheme budgets to reduce the overall level of borrowing. Because that's what that second recommendation says.
I don't know if I can help. I think this confusion relates to the fact that there's two references to options 1 to 4.
Yeah.
The first decision that Cabinet's being asked to take is in respect of the extent of the works proposed at Overstrand. And going back to your earlier question, Councillor Dixon, about when the works were identified as being needed, there was CLT was advised in the autumn of last year that there was an emerging issue at Overstrand which needed to be addressed in terms of the undermining of the seawall, which also forms the promenade. I think if there was a proposal that looked at the restoration, refurbishment, strengthening of the whole of the seawall, as a case could be made for, that was deemed to be unaffordable in terms of the ability of this council and grant funding to secure funding. So there wasn't a case where there was, with optimism bias included and everything else, a clear demonstration that the level of financing, no other than funding, that would be required was affordable. And so there was some further work done to identify those critical areas that needed to be undertaken. And this report details those critical areas at the £1.28 million, subject to tenders, but that's the best available information that we have at this time. So that's the first decision. There is then some assumptions made based on the works which officers have done in conjunction with the Environment Agency to see how that would be financed. And that gives us the figure of 649,000, which at the moment we would need to fund ourselves. And then if you get to paragraph 1.5, which I accept there is an element of confusion over because we've got a second options 1 to 4, and I apologise for that. But this provides options that means we will fund the scheme at 0.64 million of borrowing, which we would have to take, or the subsequent options 2, 3 and 4 means that you don't take forward works which have been identified elsewhere. They are relatively minor works. This authority over many years has had an annual capital programme for repair works. So that will be to steps, to groins, to beach access points, to I think they have a technical word, but the sort of lanterns at the end of some groins being replaced. So that's something that the authority does outside of the grant funding through the Environment Agency. So it's a cost to our communities and our council taxpayers. You could, the options laid out say you could not take forward those programmed works which we've identified as important. So you don't have to borrow, and you could fund the works that are required at Overstrand by using those 3 capital allocations over the next, or those 3-year periods. So I think the decision that Cabinet has reached this morning, or is minded to reach because they haven't voted yet, is that we will remain or retain those 3 years management schemes as is proposed within the existing capital programme, and you'll increase your borrowing for the 649,000 to address what is an emerging and deteriorating issue at Overstrand as identified in the autumn period of last year, and work has been undertaken to scope something which is affordable and the best available option, we feel, given the availability of grant funding, because we couldn't probably afford to fund this ourselves directly. I hope that's helpful.
That's helpful in terms of taking us from where we were to where we are today, I think. So the context of the overall borrowing that's mentioned in that second recommendation. Can you just clarify that, please?
As it is, it would be, if we left all of the schemes as they were, 649,000 additional borrowing for the scheme, assuming we get the grant funding.
So, and that brings us back to whether Cabinet is minded to actually reduce the borrowing or to go ahead with that 649.
That's correct. The alternative is the Cabinet agrees to suspend the works which our coastal management team believe should be undertaken at other locations along the frontage because of the priority that you may decide fields need to be given to Overstrand. That is the choice that you have.
And clearly we need to prioritise this work now. So we're talking here about a potential source of external funding, the capital receipts, bringing us up to 631, and then the anticipated shortfall being borrowed, and our desired option in terms of the targeted works. So have we got enough there to progress? Have you got any further questions?
I think we have, because my understanding, if I've got it correct, is the overall, when the context of the overall word that's in that statement there refers to coastal protection list of work tasks that have been identified, rather than the overall borrowing of the council.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we need to sort of consolidate the work that we've done this morning. Sorry, there's been a few crossed wires. And sorry, Councillor Toy, you come in before I.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wondered if you wanted me to re-propose so that we can do it again. Would that be helpful?
Certainly, yeah. In terms of the two separate
I would
options.
propose to the Cabinet that we go with option 4 in terms of limited work.
Yeah.
Because we feel that's the best option that's available to us, having read all the options and understood that. And option 1 in terms of funding, in that we borrow the 649, and that obviously we work to continue to reduce that in other ways. We've heard of other possible funding options. It's got a 60% optimism bias. So I think, but that hopefully will be the maximum, provided we get the already recognised grant funding. So that would be my proposal to Cabinet in support of this scheme, is that we're option 4 in the first instance and option 1 in the second instance.
Okay.
I support that, absolutely.
Thank you. And just before we proceed to the vote, is that clear in everyone's head now? Okay. So take a vote of all those in favour, please. That's unanimous. Thank you. Item 11 is the donation station options on Cromer Pier. Councillor Shives, go ahead.
Thank you. So we have spoken for quite some time about the sustainability of our assets for the future. And it's not just about the future of this council, it's about the future of whatever comes down the road through local government reorganisation. And our very beautiful pier has been the subject of many debates in this chamber. So I've worked with the estates team to come up with some solutions, perhaps on what we can and can't do. And from that point, the idea arose for donation points. So this is a way of asking those who visit and use the pier to support the future sustainability of the pier. And it's quite an exciting thing for us to trial. We haven't trialled this elsewhere, so this could be a step forward for potentially securing the future of other assets across the district.
Yeah, absolutely. Councillor Fitchton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not against this, I'll state that, but I wonder if you are aware that you are in direct conflict with the open wide charity collection buckets at each event, and they are currently collecting for guide dogs for the blind.
Okay, so we have consulted, we have discussed obviously with our partners at Open Wide, as you would expect. These will be in distinct locations at the pier where footfall and dwell time is obviously considered to be beneficial to what we're trying to achieve here. Clearly this has been talked about a few times before, and in fact, historically there were previously donation points. We've obviously also had to consider measures that will protect people from fraud. In terms of this obviously not being a cash collection, but certainly obviously wouldn't want to deter donations to sector organisations and charities, etc. But what we're really saying to people here is, if you've had a nice day here and want to contribute to what are obviously significant maintenance obligations, please consider a donation. And if it works at this location, we'll certainly consider it at others. As we know, this among our visitor assets has the highest footfall. Very certainly it's very considerable in terms of an individual location, and has it comes at a cost in terms of maintaining that provision. So and obviously the other consideration here has been around securing hardware that's robust enough for the location, for the environment, and we've been conscious of that too. We're not promising this is going to work. It is a trial, obviously, and if it doesn't, we can obviously review that, and we certainly will keep an eye on how it's going. Councillor Holiday.
Who's responsible for maintenance? Because from personal experience, they don't always work, and you need someone to pop down and fix it.
That will be part of the review in terms of how well it works, clearly, as I've just briefly alluded to. But in terms of the ongoing maintenance, I mean, primarily it will be a property services team, but there will be an external provider here that provides that hardware set into a form of terminal or infrastructure to house it, which I think is to be determined as to whether that's directly attached to a wall or on a sort of platform or some other infrastructure there. So primarily it will be our property services team, but in terms of the provision and ensuring the payments are coming through and any damage or inoperability of that system, it would be the external provider. Okay. Anything else? Councillor Boyle, go ahead.
Yes, funnily enough, it's just a quick comment. Yesterday, I was walking along and bumped into a resident, and the resident said to me, "Have you thought about charging on the pier?" Which I thought was coincidental as it was coming up in the budget. And they were in favour of it because it is obviously down to individuals and it's not an in-your-face way of doing it. So, and obviously in other parts of the country, it's very successful. So I really do feel as, a regular on Cromer Pier, I would be pleased to see the option for people, because I think some people would be really pleased to see it.
Yeah,
so thank you.
Absolutely. Certainly. And yeah, that is the case. I mean, I don't have any data supported, but anecdotally, the experience of others that charge for entry has not been good, with some suggestions that it puts off as many as 60% of visitors. We don't want, of course, as well, for the pier to be exclusive in any way, but actually there's a tipping point there, which I think you meet very much straight away if you introduce turnstile entry. And that might have an impact in terms of your concessions and other business operations on the pier. And obviously that is important to our profit share arrangements as well, which help sustain this wonderful facility. Councillor Toy.
Yeah, just so I think we've got to a stage where yeah, I think they're a good idea. You know, we've all used them. I think I've used it a few times recently in other locations. And actually, without finding all options to keep this maintained, as you said, with profit share and this and all the other things that we put into it, there actually wouldn't be anywhere else for people to come and collect. You know, the other people that Councillor Fitch-Tillett spoke about, we'd lose the pier, and therefore there wouldn't be that attraction for them to come along anyhow. So for a 6-month trial, I think it's we should do it. We should see what it turns in. So I'm happy to recommend this. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you as well to officers that have explored this work and possibility. Okay, so it was proposed by Councillor Shires and I think seconded by Councillor Toy. And just to check before we proceed to the vote, were there any final questions? If not, can we take a vote of all of those in favour, please? That is unanimous. Okay, so we have no reason obviously to exclude the press and public, and there is no private business. So thank you for joining us here today, and that's the conclusion of the meeting.